The US state of Washington in the American Pacific Northwest is infamous for its wet weather, with rain falling an average of 150 days a year. In Oakville, a small town of around 700 people, 70 kilometres southwest of Seattle, average rainfall exceeds 100 centimetres per month from October through April, with the driest months typically being July and August. But the summer of 1994 was different. For in August that year, the ever-present grey clouds hovering over Oakville brought not rain, but a scene straight out of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Torrents of strange gelatinous white substance that coated every surface, killed dozens of animals, and made anyone who came into contact with it violently ill. Then, as quickly as it appeared, the bizarre substance evaporated into thin air, leaving a mystery that endures to this day. The Oakville incident began around 3 a.m. on August 7, 1994, as tiny blobs of gelatinous material began falling from the sky. Among the first to witness the strange phenomenon was police officer David Lacey, then on patrol with a colleague. Quote, "We turned our windshield wipers on, and it just started smearing to the point where we could almost not see. And we both looked at each other and said, well, geez, this isn't right. I mean, we're out in the middle of nowhere, basically. Where did this come from?" The substance was very mushy. It's almost like if you had Jell-O in your hands and you could pretty much squish it through your fingers. We did have some bells go off in our house that basically said, this isn't right, this isn't normal. Meanwhile, residents all over the Oakville area began reporting the same strange substance falling on their properties. Among these was Dottie Hearn, who owned a farm on the outskirts of town. As her daughter, Sunny Barclift, later recalled, "It looked like hail lying on top of the firewood box and everywhere else. So I just went over and touched it, and it wasn't hail. It was a gelatinous-like material, no colour at all, and about the size of grains of rice. It was literally everywhere, in the grass, on foliage, on my truck window." In all, the blobs fell over an area of around nearly 50 square miles in and around Oakville. But while residents were puzzled by the phenomena, few were overly concerned. That is, until the sickness began. Later in the afternoon, on August the 7th, Officer Lacey suddenly fell seriously ill. "I was at the point where I could hardly breathe. I started to put together that possibly whatever the substance was, it made me violently sick like I never had been before, to the point where it just totally shut me down." Meanwhile, Dottie Hearn also suddenly took ill. Shortly after touching the strange substance with her bare hands, she was found by her daughter sprawled on the floor, suffering from severe nausea and vertigo. She was cold, drenched with perspiration. My mum had been vomiting. She had extreme vertigo. She complained that she had difficulty with her vision. Her vision was blurring. Hearn was later taken to hospital, where she was initially diagnosed with Meniere's disease, a disorder of the inner ear. But her daughter was skeptical of the diagnosis, later recalling, "She had extreme vertigo, dizziness, and felt the room was spinning. Those are all symptoms of that disease. However, she also had a fever and other symptoms of infection. She spent 4 days in the hospital." Upon her release, I asked Dr. Little what her discharge diagnosis was. He shrugged his shoulders and said, "I don't know. Some type of virus." She did have a complete recovery after she arrived home and over time. Meniere's disease usually manifests as an ongoing problem, but she never had the symptoms again. For some reason, as we were going out the door, I remembered the substance, and I wondered if perhaps it might have some sort of an effect on her, if it might have made her sick. So I opted at that moment to take a sample of this gelatinous material to the hospital. Dozens of other Oakville residents also reported sudden mysterious illnesses ranging from nausea and vertigo to severe flu-like symptoms. Unlike the flu, however, in many cases these symptoms lasted up to 3 months. Regular safety precautions did little to stave off infection. Indeed, Officer Lacey and Sunny Barclift both wore gloves while handling the blobs. Nor were humans the only ones affected. 3 days after the blobs fell, Sunny Barclift's kitten suddenly died, while Dottie Hearn's 2 dogs came down with severe vomiting and diarrhea, the cause of which was never determined. The numerous barn cats and other animals residing on Dottie Hearn's farm also mysteriously vanished, while frogs, ravens, and other wild animals were found dead near clumps of blobs, green slime dripping from their mouths. Local farmers even reported larger animals like cows and horses falling seriously ill after coming into contact with the substance. And the August the 7th downpour was not an isolated incident. Over the following 3 weeks, the blobs rained down a further 5 times, each fall accompanied by a wave of human and animal illness. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the blobs were gone, dissolved into the soil or evaporated into the air, leaving few clues as to their nature or origin. Thankfully, Sunny Barclift still had the sample from Dottie Hearn's farm, which she brought to Dr. David Little, her mother's attending physician at McCleary Hospital. While Dr. Little was skeptical skeptical that the blobs had caused Dotierne's illness, he nonetheless agreed to send the sample to the lab for analysis. It was here that a lab tech made a surprising discovery. The mysterious blobs contained human white blood cells. Stranger still, all these cells were missing their nuclei, the central organelles that contain a cell's genetic material. Baffled, Barcliffe next took the sample to the Washington State Department of Health Laboratories in Seattle, where microbiologist Michael McDowell spread the blobs on a nutrient medium to see if anything would grow. The cell culture eventually yielded colonies of two bacteria commonly found in the human gut, Pseudomonas fluorescens and Enterobacter colicae. Neither, however, is known to be harmful to humans or can account for the severe symptoms experienced by the residents of Oakville. The next scientist to examine the blobs was Michael Osweiler of the Washington Department of Ecology, who confirmed the McCleary Hospital Lab's findings that the substance contained eukaryotic, that is, nucleus-bearing cells. Tim Davis, a microbiologist at the private firm Amtest Laboratories, came to the same conclusion, though he, like Osweiler, was unable to determine the exact species or origin of the cells. And while modern analysis techniques could theoretically shed more light on the mysterious substance, shortly after presenting his report to his supervisor, Michael Osweiler returned to his lab to discover that Sonny Barcliffe's precious sample had vanished. According to Osweiler, it is the first and only time in his 30 years with the Department of Ecology that a sample under his care has gone missing. At this point, we could cue the X-Files theme. In the absence of hard evidence, speculation as to the origins of the Oakville blobs has run rampant. One early theory posited by Michael Osweiler was that the blobs were concentrated liquid waste dropped from a commercial airliner. However, the Federal Aviation Authority quickly quashed this theory, pointing out that airplane toilet waste is dyed deep blue to allow leaks to be easily spotted. The next popular theory was far more outlandish, attributing the blob's appearance to U.S. Air Force bombing practice conducted over the Pacific Ocean. According to this theory, these bombing runs obliterated large schools of jellyfish and blasted their pulverized remains into the upper atmosphere, from where they rained down onto the Oakville area. And for more on another Pacific Northwest town where it rained chunks of considerably larger animal, please check out our video, The Curious Case of Exploding Whales. While Master Sergeant Thaddeus Hosley, spokesman at McCord Air Force Base, later confirmed that the 354th Fighter Squadron was indeed conducting live bombing practice 12 kilometres off the coast around the time of the incident, this theory fails to explain why the blobs only fell over the Oakville area. Also, why all the blobs were of uniform size, or why pieces of other marine creatures were also not found on the ground. Nor does it explain the mysterious symptoms experienced by those who came into contact with the blobs, the effects of jellyfish stings being considerably different. Despite this, the jellyfish theory proved so popular that the residents of Oakville discussed holding an annual jellyfish festival to commemorate the events of August 1994. One local bar even invented a jellyfish cocktail composed of vodka, fruit juice, and jello. But while jellyfish were almost certainly not responsible for the Oakville blobs, it is still possible that the US Air Force was, and this brings us to by far the darkest theory regarding the incident. In his report to the Washington Department of Ecology, Michael Osweiler stated that under the microscope, the Oakville blobs appeared to be man-made, with tiny cavities seemingly designed to hold and disperse bacteria. At the same time, Oakville residents reported a noticeable increase in Air Force activity over their town in the days leading up to the incident, with Dottie Hearn recalling, "We had a significant amount of military aircraft flying over the home prior to this happening. Every day almost. We had slow-flying bombers, helicopters, all black in color, and we kind of thought maybe it might have come from them." These reports suggest that the Oakville incident might not have been an accident and that the town had in fact been the target of US Air Force experiments on biological warfare. This is not as outlandish as it may sound. Between 1949 and 1969, the US military sprayed various American cities, including San Francisco, Minneapolis, St. Louis, and New York, with simulated biowarfare agents to determine how vulnerable they were to biological attack. These simulated biological agents included chemicals such as zinc cadmium sulfide and bacteria such as Bacillus globigii, then thought to be harmless to humans. As you might have guessed, these substances turned out to be rather more dangerous than initially believed, and are believed to have caused hundreds of severe illnesses and deaths, but well, that's a topic for another video. However, without confirmation from the US government, this explanation for the Oakville incident remains little more than a tantalizing conspiracy theory. A less exciting, though far more likely theory holds that the blobs were, in fact, grains of chemical sodium polyacrylate, a gelatinous polymer capable of absorbing 800 times its weight in water. Sodium polyacrylate is used in a variety of products, including disposable diapers, menstrual pads, bandages, and cold packs, and as a thickener in food, drilling fluid, and industrial coatings. It's also used in agriculture to help retain moisture in the soil. According to this theory, polyacrylate particles from a nearby farmer's field were swept up by the wind and carried into the upper atmosphere, where they absorbed water, swelled into gelatinous pellets, and rained back to the ground. A similar incident occurred in 2012 near Bournemouth in England, lending further credence to this theory, though in the latter case the polyacrylate particles were already in the soil and swelled during a rainstorm, giving the impression that they had fallen from the sky overnight. Yet another theory posits that the blobs were a form of star jelly, a mysterious gelatinous substance that suddenly appears on the ground overnight and which has appeared in scientific reports and poetry since at least the 17th century. Once believed to have been deposited by passing comets and shooting stars, star jelly is now thought to be, among other things, the remains of amphibian reproductive organs and spawn vomited up by birds and other predators, blobs of blue-green algae known as nostoc, or colonies of gelatinous single-celled organisms called slime molds. Once again, however, these theories fail to account for the strange symptoms experienced by those who came into contact with the Oakville blobs. Here, the most likely explanation might be the most disappointing, namely that the two phenomena, in fact, have nothing to do with each other. For despite the endless analysis and speculation surrounding the Oakville blobs, no rigorous epidemiological study of the incident has ever been conducted. Supposed human victims of the blobs were never systematically interviewed or examined, dead animals were never collected or necropsied, and aside from the preliminary examinations of Sonny Barcliffe's sample conducted by the McCleary Hospital, Department of Health, and Department of Ecology, no further analysis of the blobs has been performed. Thus, the evidence linking the Oakville blobs to the outbreak of severe vertigo and flu-like symptoms is largely circumstantial, based on anecdote and hearsay. Furthermore, through countless retellings for news outlets and television programs like Unsolved Mysteries, key details have been ignored or altered in the interests of telling a good story. For instance, Sonny Barcliffe's kitten was already suffering from severe digestive issues at the time the blobs fell, and its death, and that of all the animals in the area, may have thus been a complete coincidence. We humans are born pattern seekers, and the close proximity between the blobs falling and the outbreak of strange illnesses may very well have led Oakville residents to link together two completely unrelated incidents. But with 30 years having passed since the incidents, its supposed victims have long since recovered, and the only known sample of the blobs mysteriously disappeared, so we may never know for sure. All we can do is keep watching the skies, because the truth is out there.